being a guide to the purpose of man and an experiment proving the God hypothesis. The purpose of man cannot be realized until the God hypothesis is validated. When the God hypothesis is validated, the purpose of man will be fulfilled. The purpose of man is to create value. This builds the church. But value has an objective correlate, which means to create value, what we do must build the church. The building of the church demonstrates the necessity for God. This is experimentally provable. The purpose of man is fulfilled in the building up of the people of God as His church. This is what is known of as doing works of faith. In doing this, we build up the people of God, the correlate of which is the church. It all ties together, and one cannot be done without doing the other. But there needs to be a quantifiable measure of this, as value is an objective factor. The moral imperative is to never impose costs onto another or others. To do unto others as we would have them do unto us, or to act as if our actions was the template for a universal rule, is to behave in such a way that no cost we create is externalized onto society and future generations. This moral imperative adds value to the things of God. This is how the church is built. Building the church is part of the experiment that validates the message of God. The experimental test group constitutes the church. We cannot do church without engaging each other as the church and proving as a test group the God hypothesis. No event or circumstance justifies us transferring our costs onto society and future generations. Nor is there any way to legitimize the externalization the costs we create onto society and future generations. This would be tantamount to saying, it is good to deny God. No matter how "do not steal" is said, it comes down to the same thing. No one owes us a free ride. We have no right to take what was created by someone else. Most people can see the sense of this, but acceptance of it comes with some misgivings, for no one wants to admit their own expropriations are as unjustified and as illegitimate as the acts of the most infamous crooks. This is probably especially difficult for governments. How can they see themselves as a protection racket? We all want a free ride to some degree. It is the degree and type of freeness we are comfortable with that divides us. As to the rejection of the universal constant, that is something everyone on planet Earth does. Humans do not like objectivity when it applies to their moral choices. Humans want to give themselves a little slack. This may not be a conscious or explicit conspiracy against God, but the implicit rejection of God is obvious. Every people, group and individual engage in rapine against the kingdom of God. No people want their rapine to be made visible by being subjected to a moral code. All peoples everywhere for all times lust after the property and the things of God. The lusts of the flesh manifest a desire for what God created. Our passion for the things of the flesh explains why the moral virtues are rejected. The people of the flesh believe we are part of the natural world. They see cycles in the way the natural world operates. One animal is the food of another, and it is in turn the prey of a higher-level predator. In the end, all life return to the earth to give rise to new life. The body of man is flesh and not outside of this cycle, but we are not flesh. We as the church are on a different plane of existence. We do not feed off of each other, in the flesh, and we ought not to exploit one another in the spirit. We build civilizations because we create value for one another. We cooperate in the building of community. But to do this systematically means we adhere to the universal constant. There has to be a standard we need to be judged by. The more we comply with the universal constant, the more we contribute to the world's total wealth. Man adds value to the biosphere. All other life forms exist in a negative balance, as they consume more energy than they produce. This is entropy, and all things are subject to it. Mankind, unlike animal kind, has a purpose, and that purpose is to produce value. In contrast, animals only need to stay alive long enough to reproduce. The purpose of man is to build the church. It is in the church and as the church that value is made manifest. But for the most part we have abandoned this path. We rejected the church and lost the ability to produce copious amounts of value. The church was created as a way back to Eden. The more value we create relative to the waste produced, the closer to Eden we get. The church would have got us back on track and aligned us with our purpose had we been faithful in building the church. To create value, we would need to express our faith by producing fruits of faith, which culminates in the building of the biblical church. We cannot build the church without faith in God because God has the solutions to the problems of man. These solutions encompass or are encompassed by the church. It is in eradicating our problems and the source of them that we build the church. It is the rejection of God and His church that causes problems. If we do not create costs that we are unwilling or unable to pay, we do not need anyone to pay our way. We are not creating problems for others to solve if we pay our costs by our own hand. If we do not need persons appointed to solve the problems we create, we do not create problems for anyone to solve. Christians are under God and doing works of faith, and this builds the church. Unemployment, debt, poverty, inflation, pollution, waste, taxation, homelessness, war, property crime, and the cost of the state generally are all social costs created by disputing the path laid down by God. We need to pay our own way. When we create costs for others, we create social problems because someone else has to pay our debt. This has to create problems. But the world has played us and our concern for these costs. Our leaders promise to prevent externalizations by acting as our adjudicators. So, we elect kings and presidents to be our protectors. But they do not tell us the social cost of government. We find out too late, after they have the power, that they cannot and do not pay the costs they create. The primary cost of government is taxation. However, the actions of the state leads to wars and inflation and all other social costs. The state is always after more property and power. The state is the world's first protection racket. It makes us believe we are dependent on it, as if we are the parasite. It creates animosity between groups and then volunteers to mediate the conflict. But the bottom line is that when we fail to have faith in one another, the state steps in. The universal constant is based on faith and defends against this kind of subversion. The universal constant is a unit of faith and is able to measure the intensity with which we build the church. The purpose of man is to seek perfection in faith. The manifestation of faith is the church, but to have faith requires a changed life. The key requirement is to not create social costs. Living in faith produces the universal church, which represents the value created by believers living in faith. But to fulfill our purpose in ways that does not produce social costs requires an accounting not available to us in this world of the flesh. This is the problem with all the good intentions in the world. We can neither live in faith nor create the value that builds the church without a way to track costs. If we are to live in faith and seek moral perfection, we need a standard. We cannot be guided by a purpose if that purpose does not have clear guideposts. The universal constant allows us to measure the value we create and plot it against the costs this activity created. Our human value can be determined in an objective and verifiable way. We can know who a Christian is. Life is transformative. We cannot live without transforming nature. Nature was given to us by God. We cannot own it, but in using it we create costs. The church is a way to transform the consumption generated by living into something of value. This creating of value to benefit others is called charity. It is acting as if others mattered. One way of thinking about the building of the church is as a way to pay it forward. To differentiate what God has done from what we do, we only want to measure our contribution. The categories of what belongs to God and what belongs to man are what we call assets and equity. Assets relate to the physical world, which is the world of the visible, real things created by God. Equity is the value added to assets in the transformative activity of work. But value is a subjective idea until it can be measured. Mankind values all kinds of things which may or may not have actual value. We can give anything any value we choose, but this is not the value it has. Unless the value is measured, the value we give it is only a subjective determination of value. We require an objective verification process to ascertain true value. If value is established by the value of the work added to an asset, the labor theory of value ought to be applicable. However, it was always argued that this theory overlooked the risk investors took when putting private capital to work in the form of a business venture. But perhaps this is a red herring. If investments contribute to the value of an asset or asset pool, this ought to be verified by an objective method of determining value. Otherwise, the value of an investment is a purely subjective cost and possibly misleading. The economy requires a unit designed to validate and express the actual value added to an asset or assets. The value added to an asset is represented by preferred shares. Preferred shares have a value equal to the value of a company minus any expenses and liabilities, including owner's capital. We can consider loans and outstanding expenses as liabilities. However, we ought to look at the value of the company's assets as a liability also. The company accounts need to be adjusted for the value of what does not belong to the company, and this rightfully includes all fixed capital costs and liabilities accruing to the owner. All the company has a right to is the value of the labor that goes into the goods or services. However, as is easy to see, this totally cuts out every claim but that of the worker, which gives us the labor theory of value. But this is where the rubber meets the road, because how do we strip all the fictitious costs away from the costs created by work? The tool needed for this is a unit of account that only registers actual value. Unit of accounts are a bookkeeping device used to track income and expenses. Income is from work and expenses are debits created as we get paid. Payment is not the receipt of units of account. These have no actual value. We are paid as we exchange the value we created for the value created by others, using the unit of account as a universal solvent or means of exchange. Our hour of work creating widgets is exchanged for the goods and services we actually wanted, and which is the compensation we worked for. The universal constant is the unit of account, as this is the unit into which all work is divided and which measures or standardizes all outputs. The unit of account can be likened to a dollar or other currency, but conventional currencies are all formed from assets, which makes them a product with commercial value. A unit of account cannot have value. It is strictly a bookkeeping device used to standardize units of value. The universal constant is the value of 1 unit of labor, Lu. Lu xn equals a living wage. The living wage amount is given by the number of labor units needed per hour to maintain a reasonable lifestyle, based on a 40-hour work week. If the labor cannot create the value for Lu, it is phrased out. Where actual value, the value of the universal constant more labor is added. In other words, work producing low-value labor is discontinued in favor of enhancing those doing high-value jobs.